1969 was the year Ford built the most extreme Mustang in history. The Boss 429 packed a NASCAR-bred 429 cubic-inch semi-Hemi engine into a pony car that was never designed to handle such brutality. Only 1,359 were ever built, each one hand-assembled by specialty coach builders who had to redesign the entire front end just to make the monster engine fit. Here are 20 bizarre facts about Ford's ultimate homologation special. 1. It was built solely to satisfy NASCAR rules. The Boss 429 existed for one reason only: NASCAR's homologation requirements mandating that manufacturers build 500 street versions of any engine they wanted to race. Ford desperately needed to compete with Chrysler's dominant Hemi engines that were embarrassing the blue oval on superspeedways every weekend. The street car was an afterthought, a necessary evil to get the 429 semi-Hemi onto NASCAR tracks. The irony is profound. Ford built a street car nobody really wanted for a racing program that ultimately failed to deliver the victories they expected. 2. The engine didn't fit. Ford had to redesign the Mustang. The massive 429 semi-Hemi engine was so large that it wouldn't fit in a standard Mustang without major structural modifications. Ford had to relocate the shock towers outward, redesign the entire front suspension geometry, and modify the firewall to accommodate the enormous power plant. The engineering investment exceeded $1 million just to make 1,359 cars possible. This wasn't an engine swap, it was a complete vehicle redesign disguised as a Mustang option package. 3. Carcraft built every single Boss. 429 Ford contracted all Boss 429 production to Carcraft, a specialty coach builder in Brighton, Michigan, rather than building them on regular assembly lines. Each car required approximately 6 hours of hand assembly time compared to the 90 minutes needed for standard Mustangs. The specialized construction process resulted in better build quality than factory Mustangs, with tighter tolerances and more careful attention to detail. Carcraft's craftsmen essentially hand-built each Boss 429 like a custom show car rather than a mass-produced vehicle. 4. The 429 actually displaced 460 cubic inches. Ford's marketing department committed mathematical fraud by calling the engine a 429 when bore and stroke measurements actually calculated to 460 cubic inches. The 4.36-inch bore and 3.59-inch stroke yielded 459.9 cubic inches of displacement, making every Boss 429, technically, a Boss 460. Ford kept the established 429 name to avoid confusing NASCAR officials and customers who already associated that number with Ford's big block family. This deception remained hidden until engine rebuilds decades later revealed the true specifications. 5. Only 3 paint colors were available, Boss. 429 buyers could choose from exactly 3 factory colors: Wimbledon white, royal maroon, or black jade green. This severe limitation resulted from Carcraft's modest painting facilities rather than Ford's design preferences. Special order colors were theoretically available but extremely rare, requiring custom arrangements that most dealers avoided. The limited color palette created artificial rarity, with certain combinations becoming exponentially more valuable to modern collectors. Ford's most expensive Mustang offered fewer color choices than the cheapest economy cars. 6. The hood scoop was backwards. The Boss 429's distinctive hood scoop faced backward, toward the windshield, making it completely non-functional despite its aggressive racing appearance. This rear-facing orientation was purely aesthetic, chosen because it looked more dramatic than a forward-facing functional scoop. The irony was devastating. Ford's ultimate performance Mustang featured fake performance styling that actually hurt aerodynamics. Real ram air induction would have improved power, but stylists prioritized visual drama over functional engineering. The backward scoop became an iconic design element that served no purpose except looking menacing. 7. Power steering was mandatory. Unlike other Mustangs that offered manual steering as a cost-saving option, every Boss 429 came with mandatory power steering due to the engine's enormous weight distribution. The 429 semi-Hemi's cast-iron construction created such severe front-end bias that manual steering became physically impossible for most drivers to operate safely. Ford eliminated the manual steering option entirely, rather than risk customer complaints about uncontrollable vehicles. This mandatory equipment added cost and complexity, while acknowledging that the engine was simply too heavy for the Mustang chassis to handle naturally. 8. The transmission tunnel had to be enlarged. Installing the massive C6 automatic transmission required CarCraft technicians to cut and re-weld the Mustang's floor pan, creating a larger transmission tunnel for each individual car. This hand fabrication process meant no two Boss 429s had identical floor modifications, with subtle variations in cutting patterns and welding techniques. The enlarged tunnel reduced interior space and required custom carpet fitting. Modern restoration shops often discover unique tunnel modifications that prove each car's hand-built nature, making parts interchangeability between cars problematic. 9. Boss 429S had different suspension than all other Mustangs. The relocated shock towers required completely different suspension geometry, increasing the front track width by 2 inches and creating handling characteristics unlike any other Mustang variant. Standard Mustang suspension components wouldn't interchange with Boss 429 parts, making the car essentially a unique model disguised as an option package. The wider track improved stability, but required different wheels, tires, and alignment specifications. These suspension modifications made the Boss 429 handle like a completely different vehicle despite sharing the Mustang name and basic body shell. 10. The interior was surprisingly basic. Despite costing nearly twice as much as a Mustang GT, the Boss 429 featured a remarkably plain interior with standard Mustang appointments and minimal special equipment. No unique Boss badges, special trim pieces, or luxury upgrades distinguished the interior from economy Mustangs. Ford concentrated all development money on the engine and necessary chassis modifications, leaving nothing for interior enhancements. Buyers paying premium prices received basic black vinyl seats and standard instrumentation, making the Boss 429's cabin feel surprisingly cheap compared to its astronomical purchase price and exotic mechanical specifications. 11. Serial numbers skipped around. Randomly, CarCraft used a bizarre VIN assignment system that bore no relationship to actual production sequence, creating authentication nightmares for modern collectors trying to determine build dates and originality. Cars with higher serial numbers were often built weeks before lower-numbered vehicles, making production tracking nearly impossible. This non-sequential numbering resulted from CarCraft's small shop mentality rather than Ford's systematic approach to vehicle identification. The random VIN assignment means that determining a Boss 429's actual place in the production sequence requires extensive documentation research beyond simple serial number analysis. 12. Some cars were built twice. Quality control issues at CarCraft occasionally required completely disassembling finished Boss 429s and rebuilding them from scratch, resulting in cars with multiple build dates and conflicting documentation. These double-built cars created authentication confusion as components carried different date codes and assembly marks from their rebuilds. Some vehicles returned to CarCraft for major modifications after customer complaints, essentially becoming new cars with used VINs. Modern collectors sometimes discover evidence of multiple assembly processes, making these twice-built Boss 429s among the most difficult classics to authenticate properly. 13. The exhaust system cost more than some complete cars. The Boss 429's custom-fabricated exhaust system carried an $800 price tag in $1969, when complete economy cars sold for around $2,000 total. Each exhaust was hand-built with specialized headers, custom-bent tubing, and unique mufflers designed specifically for the 429 semi-Hemi's requirements. The expensive exhaust represented nearly 20% of the car's total selling price, demonstrating how exotic components drove Boss 429 costs beyond reasonable limits. This single exhaust system cost more than many families spent on their entire annual car payments during the late 1960s. 14. Ford lost money on every single Boss 429 Internal Ford documents reveal that each Boss 429 cost over $7,000 to produce while selling for just $4,087, creating a staggering loss of nearly $3,000 per car. The total program deficit exceeded $4 million, making the Boss 429 one of automotive history's most expensive homologation exercises. Ford accepted these massive losses as the cost of NASCAR competitiveness, treating each sale as a racing investment rather than a profitable transaction. The financial disaster proved that homologation specials served racing politics rather than business sense. 15. The carburetor was smaller than stock Mustang GT. Despite producing significantly more power, the Boss 429 used a 735 cubic feet per minute Holley carburetor that was actually smaller than the 780 CFM unit found on 390-powered Mustang GTS. This counterintuitive restriction resulted from emissions compliance requirements that forced Ford to limit airflow despite the engine's massive displacement. The smaller carburetor choked the 429's breathing ability, preventing it from reaching its full potential in street trim. This emissions-mandated restriction made Ford's most powerful engine less responsive than smaller, less sophisticated power plants in the same model line. 16. Dealers didn't want to sell them. Chevrolet dealers across America viewed Boss 429s as expensive white elephants that tied up valuable showroom space and floor plan financing without generating reasonable profits. Most dealers ordered the absolute minimum quantities required by Ford, often just one or two cars to satisfy corporate allocation requirements. The specialized nature and astronomical price made them difficult to explain to customers who could buy loaded Mustang GTS for half the cost. Many dealers actively discouraged Boss 429 sales, steering customers toward more profitable and practical alternatives that wouldn't require extensive technical explanations or service headaches. 17. Many Boss 429s sat unsold for years. The combination of high prices and limited appeal meant that numerous 1969 Boss 429s remained on dealer lots well into 1972, with some cars sitting unsold for over 3 years after production. Desperate dealers offered substantial discounts and incentives to move stagnant inventory, sometimes selling $4,087 cars for as little as $3,200 to clear showroom space. The irony is staggering. Vehicles now worth $300,000 to $500,000 were once considered unsellable merchandise that dealers couldn't give away. This market rejection created artificial rarity as many cars accumulated dust rather than miles. 18. The Boss 429 was slower than a Boss 302. Despite the massive displacement and power advantage, Boss 429s consistently lost quarter-mile races to lighter, more agile Boss 302s due to the weight penalty from the enormous engine. The 429's extra 400-plus pounds overwhelmed its horsepower advantage, creating the embarrassing situation where Ford's flagship muscle car couldn't outrun its smaller sibling. Contemporary magazine tests showed Boss 302s running 14.0 second quarter miles, while Boss 409s struggled to break 14.5 seconds. 19. Insurance companies refused coverage. Major insurance companies classified Boss 429s as experimental or specialty vehicles, refusing standard automotive coverage and forcing owners into expensive specialty insurance markets typically reserved for racing cars. The combination of massive engine displacement, hand-built construction, and limited production made actuaries treat them like exotic supercars rather than domestic muscle cars. Standard auto insurance was simply unavailable for many Boss 429 buyers, effectively doubling the total cost of ownership through specialty coverage requirements. This insurance nightmare eliminated many potential customers who couldn't afford the additional expense. 20. Ford destroyed all the tooling after production. When Boss 429 production ended in 1970, Ford made the deliberate decision to scrap over $1 million worth of specialized tooling, dies, and manufacturing equipment rather than storing it for potential future use. This destruction eliminated any possibility of reviving Boss 429 production or manufacturing reproduction parts using original equipment. The tooling demolition represented Ford's acknowledgement that the Boss 429 experiment had failed commercially and would never be repeated. The Boss 429 proves that sometimes the greatest automotive legends are born from commercial disasters. Ford's most extreme Mustang failed in the marketplace but became priceless in history. Hit that subscribe button for more stories about the cars that changed everything while nobody was watching.